Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. First, I want to acknowledge we're gathered upon the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and I thank these nations for their generosity towards all who live on these lands. First, I want to begin by speaking directly to anyone in Vancouver who has ever had to deal with racism and discrimination. We like to think of ourselves as a community where those kind of things don't happen. But our history and the stories we hear from our neighbors today show us that this is simply not the case, and it's never been the case. Our city is built on stolen land, with the labor of immigrants who were taxed based on their race and denied basic freedoms and dignity. The demographic composition of those holding positions in our public institutions have never mirrored the demographic composition of the society for which they make decisions. This was and is done to enrich men who look like me, and systemic inequality and racism persist to this day in all our institutions. These systems have afforded me all kinds of privilege that has led to all my positions in life. And as I proceed today, I need to acknowledge that. I acknowledge I have not experienced the discrimination that too many of our neighbors have. I acknowledge that all public and private institutions reinforce the dominant culture, including historic patterns of colonialism and racism. The City of Vancouver, the Vancouver Police Board, and the Vancouver Police Department have taken some strong first steps to address these deep flaws, but much more needs to be done. As a person of privilege, it is often hard to know what concrete actions to take. But I do know that is the oppressive culture that has to make amends and reparations, not those who have been oppressed. And while consultation is needed, it is we who have traditionally oppressed who have to take the first steps towards reconciliation and eliminating systemic racism. Since I took office 20 months ago, I have tried to make a difference by concentrating my efforts on building more affordable housing for those of moderate and low incomes, bringing safe supply to stop our overdose crisis, investing in childcare, transit, and measures to address our climate emergency. Over the last few months, I have concentrated on flattening the COVID-19 curve, especially in the downtown east side, and getting ready for the coming economic crisis. And I want to thank Vancouver City Council and our staff for their extraordinary work and dedication to these efforts. However, today I want to talk about policing and police reform. The global outcry against police violence we've recently witnessed is powerful and must be addressed in all cities, including Vancouver. While some important steps have been taken in Vancouver by the City of Vancouver and the Police Board and the Police Department, the systematic changes called for around the globe require bolder action. Today I'm going to outline what actions I will be taking as first steps towards meaningful change. But first, I want to describe who makes what decisions about policing in Vancouver and across the province more broadly. A lot of the conversations we've been hearing about police reform have been informed by events and systems in American cities. But policing in Canada, and specifically in our city, is very different. Many people might not know that Vancouver City Council can do little to affect policing in the city, despite the fact that we provide the vast majority of funding, which constitutes 20% of our city's $1.6 billion operating budget. The province's Police Act requires us to more or less rubber stamp police budgets outside minimal discretionary spending. If cities say no, the province can, and it has in the past, step in and override our decision. The Vancouver Police Board, the employer and governing body of the Vancouver Police Department, provides civilian governance and oversight of policing. The VPD Board is a collection of provincial appointed volunteers who oversee expenditures and local policing policies at monthly meetings. In my experience, the board is diverse, dedicated, independent, and deeply committed to representing the community, Board members bring their best skills and abilities to the table. While independent, the police board has only a small budget by which to provide oversight, and operations of the police rest in the hands of our very capable chief, Adam Palmer. In the end, though, if we are to make major structural changes to policing, it is the province that must act. And here's why. The province determines how much funding municipalities must provide to local police, determines what training municipal officers receive, creates and staffs oversight agencies, including the Office of Police Complaints and Independent Investigations Office. The province also appoints watchdogs. It sets the province-wide policing standards. It sets the use of force, restraint, and other policies. It writes and approves the Police Act, and it appoints all police board members. So while many U.S. cities, including Minneapolis, can massively restructure their police, neither organizations which I chair can legally do this, even if they wanted to. So with this in mind, today I am calling on Premier John Horgan to conduct a comprehensive review of policing in British Columbia. All police, including the Vancouver Police Department, other independent police departments, and the RCMP. So to repeat, today, I'm calling on Premier John Horgan to conduct a comprehensive review of policing in British Columbia. All police, including the Vancouver Police Department, other independent police departments, and the RCMP. In many ways, we are lucky to be having this conversation today when we have a provincial government in place that has so strongly demonstrated its commitment to reconciliation, combating racism and discrimination, and investing in our social fabric. The impacts our current approach to policing has on people with mental illness, low-income people, people experiencing homelessness, drug users, sex workers, women, two-spirit, queer, trans, and gender diverse people must be included in this review. And as stewards of our social safety net, the provincial government is best placed to examine how we can better balance investments in safety, criminal justice, and policing with more investments in community-based approaches to mental health, youth outreach, poverty, and homelessness. Finally, the review should also examine diversity and training within policing services and oversight bodies, the efficacy and funding model for body-worn cameras by all police in British Columbia, and ending street checks. This is a watershed moment. Black, Indigenous, and people of color across our province expect people like me and the Premier to use our privilege and our power to do something profound and fundamentally change how policing is done in our province. I believe that we can do this. I will be submitting this request in writing to the Premier and will ask for an urgent response that matches the urgency of the issue. I will also send a copy of this letter to the leaders of the BC Liberal and BC Green parties and request their public response. It isn't very often that we're given a chance to reimagine something as fundamental and important as how our society protects its people. Through terrible tragedy, but also incredible bravery and energy on behalf of activists and community members, we have that chance now. So let's make it count. Thanks very much, and I'm happy to take your questions.
So first up, we've got John Woodward from CTV. John?
You were talking about some of the structures that the province runs, like the Office of the Police Complaint Commissioner. We did a story yesterday looking at how a process that was supervised by them and managed by, I guess, the individual police departments resulted in a 2-year delay and then no charges for some officers who took down a black man on Granville Street. And I wondered what you thought about that.
This was initially before my time as chair of the police board, but I've reviewed your story this morning. I find it disturbing in a number of ways. That it's taken a long time to get an answer on this. The Office of Police Complaints Commissioner, the Police Complaints Commissioner, has, I believe, initially referred this to the RCMP to review. There was findings of no wrongdoing, and then it now has been referred to the Crown Prosecutor to see if they'll lay charges. That's where it is at the moment, but I agree this has taken a long time to get answers. And also, I think when I call for reform of all institutions in the province, a review of these reforms, that I think perhaps that could also apply to the Police Complaints Commission, where they could look about how they specifically handle incidents regarding people with different ancestries.
Okay, and you probably saw the vandalism of the George Vancouver statue with blue and white paint. We're not sure if that's police related or not, but what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're having a conversation here, which I think is a long time coming. I think people in other cities have been having this conversation, and it's right that it's having had now. I think there's frustration on a whole bunch of fronts, but I really think that this is the time for the province to review policing in general in the province, but with a specific concentration on racism and how the police interact with the general population.
The next question is Dan Femano from the Vancouver Sun and Province.
Or any of the other sort of senior brass at the VPD, have you kind of briefed them on this call, what you're going to be doing, or and what response have you had from them so far?
Sure, I did miss the first part of your question there, Dan.
Sorry, I'm asking what conversations, if any, you've had on this subject about your call for this review with Chief Palmer or any of the other senior VPD brass.
You know, I have very frequent conversations with Chief Palmer and have been talking to him about this specific issue. I did also have a conversation yesterday with the police board's governing body, who gave me feedback on this. However, today I am speaking as mayor. I'm speaking as somebody that's concerned about what's going on in our city, trying to explain to people the path forward for reform and how that will have to involve working with the province in order to review what's happening, but also to make suggestions for fundamental change if that's what's called for.
Do you have a sense at this stage of if there is pushback or if there's going to be pushback, either from police leadership or police union, on this kind of a review?
My sense is that a comprehensive review of all policing in the province has a likelihood of being supported. I think this, as we're seeing across Canada and around the world, that I think there's a change in public sentiment. A lot of people are waking up to racism in many, systemic racism in many institutions, and I think that, where steps have been taken in the past, I think more suggestions and then more changes at the provincial level would be welcomed.
Thank you.
The next question goes to Jordan Armstrong, Global News.
Thank you. I hear what you're saying, that the big change has to come from the province, but are there any specific policies, practices, or procedures currently undertaken by the VPD that you think should end today?
Well, and that's why it's important to understand where decisions rest, the ability to make decisions. So the last thing I want to do in these circumstances is to overpromise. So for me to stand up here and say, I'm going to end something today is basically impossible. The Vancouver Police Board, I'm the spokesperson for the Vancouver Police Board and the chair, but I don't have a vote on these bodies. I only vote in the result of the tie, and all decisions on funding are made by council. So I can steer these organizations toward considering change, but for me to stand up here and say this will end today would be a lie, and I'm not going to do that.
Just to follow up, hoping for a comment on the Pride Society's decision to not allow police going forward.
Yeah, I mean, when I heard that, it just made me sad. I mean, I ran on a platform of making a city that works for everybody, and what I envision is all of us marching forward together for change. And when I hear that groups are not able to march or things that have occurred in the past are going to cease, it means that we have to have a conversation about this as to how we can move forward and how we could all support each other going, in future Pride marches or any other kinds of calls for change. So it just makes me sad that this is happening, and I'll do my best to try to bring the two parties together so we can move forward together.
Up next is Justin McElroy, CBC.
Mayor, you have said that you can't overpromise here, but I'm wondering, do you believe the BPD's budget is currently the proper size, or if it was 100% up to you, do you believe it should be lowered?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally the BPD's budget has been about 20% of the overall operating budget of the city, although I have seen reports of large increases. I mean, we have a fact sheet here we can provide to you that shows really the staffing levels, like the frontline officer levels, have really been stagnant since 2009. So for me, you have a board that is making these decisions on the budget and then giving them to the city to decide upon. But really, this is where the provincial review has to come in place because ultimately they decide what the staffing levels will be for policing in all municipalities around the province. So whether I agree or disagree with the size of the budget, it's my ability to make change, which is important. Now, if the province empowered us at the city to have more discretion, that would also be welcome. But at this stage, if council voted for a large cut to the police, the province could and would, I imagine, override that. So a lot of the increases as well, policing is a very labor-intensive, operation, and so a lot of that is to do with the above-inflation wage increases that every year that the police are awarded.
And as a follow-up to that, you've said there's not too much you can do. The Victoria Police Board 2 nights ago passed a motion that called on a review of staffing levels and the demographics of the police force, as well as a number of other things that their police force board will do over the next few months. So will you be looking at similar measures the next time that the police board meets?
Sure, and I applaud the action of the Victoria Police Board, but I also want to point out that the last time that in Victoria and Esquimalt they went to reduce the number of officers on the front line, the province overrode them and demanded a certain level of service. So that is a key example of where we could have these conversations at the municipal level, we could have these conversations at the board level, but in the end, the buck stops at the province, and this is why we need a review. If we wanted a fundamental change in policing, it can only come through the province.
The next question is here in the room. Jay Zhang, Fairchild Radio.
Thank you. Union of BC Indian Chiefs and BC Civil Liberties Association are asking the mayor to respond with a yes or no to the question. Like, will your plan include a ban on the unnecessary, illegal, and racist practice of police strict checks in Vancouver?
Yeah, so before my time, the board initiated a study on this, an independent study. It has come forward to the board, and we have already made policy changes. The provinces also, more importantly, I think, have changed their policies in this area, but we are hearing from the organizations that you mentioned that these changes are not adequate. So I have called a special board meeting for either the end of June or beginning of July, whenever we have our new board members appointed by the province to revisit this and to have a broader discussion. So we did take action with an independent review. There were some strong recommendations made in this report. We've implemented some of these, but they do not seem adequate for some of the groups that you mentioned. So this will be reviewed again by the board.
What time is it? And do you have a specific next step?
Yeah, so we're in a situation with the Vancouver Police Board where we have a large turnover. So a lot of the long-serving members, their terms have expired. And so at this point, we're waiting for our board appointments from the province. And at this moment, we don't even have enough board members to have quorum. So we are waiting for the provincial appointments. We're hoping that they come before the end of June or the beginning of July. But this is just another example of how the province has really most of the say over the boards and policing in the province. So a review would be very important on this, but as soon as we have the number of board members to reach quorum, we'll be having this special meeting where this will be one of the topics of discussion.
The next question is on the phones. Marcella Bernardo, News 1130.
Hi, Mayor. Thank you for taking my question. I wanted to ask you about if you could clarify why you want to put an end to what you call discriminatory street checks, and also why not make body cameras mandatory? You're not calling for that yet.
Okay, so if I start with body cameras, I have asked for the province to review this. It doesn't make any sense to me to have body cameras for one police service like the VPD, but not have them for Burnaby or Richmond, we do live in a metro area, and so this should be a provincial decision as to whether to put in body cams. In the addition, this would be a big expense for a lot of municipalities. So I've heard estimates of up to $5 million added to police budgets if this was to come in place. And so this should be something that the province should review, not only in terms of whether or not it's mandatory and the usage of body cameras, but also who pays for them. Again, just to remind people, we're in the middle of a COVID-19 crisis. You know the problems we've had with our budget, losing anywhere up to $300 million in revenue this year. The province has refused to step in and help with operating. The federal government has recently said they may help us, but we have laid off 1,800 people here. So any additional expenditure is very difficult for us to handle at the moment because we would have to cut existing services. And I know we're not out of this yet. So, so there's two reasons why the body cameras need to be reviewed by the province. One is that would have to be a province-wide decision, so it's implemented in all municipalities equally. And secondly, who picks up the tab of what could be a very expensive investment is the second reason why the province needs to review this.
And the street checks?
Yeah, so I said with the street checks is that that the province changed the police, how police do street checks, and we have implemented those. The Vancouver Police have incorporated those into their operating procedures. There doesn't seem to be satisfaction with that from a number of groups. We had our own independent review at the city. We have the only municipality to put in new training programs helped by Reconciliation Canada. However, there doesn't seem to be satisfaction with that. So again, with new board members coming on, we'll review this at the special meeting that I've called, but also want it to be included in the provincial review of policing across the province.
And just to follow up, if I could, about the Pride Parade and the Pride festivities no longer wanting police being part of that, how does that clash with every other event that is sanctioned within the city of Vancouver that requires police involvement in one way or another?
Yeah, the whole thing makes me really sad. I just think that we'd come a long way where police were invited to march in past Pride parades, and I think it was showing a united community walking together against homophobia, and that was a good sign. I'm sad that has now not taking the place for the moment, although I'm comforted by the fact that the Pride Parade organizers said they would be open to reviewing this, and that's what I'll try to do, is bring the two sides together to see what we can do to to all come together again and to move the city forward.
Thank you.
Next, we have Alex DeBoer from the Crackdown podcast. Go ahead.
We know that one of the most predominant causes of harm by the VPD, particularly for Black and Indigenous people, is the war on drugs. And we know that this month, BC has had the single highest rate of fatal overdose deaths ever. So do you personally support the VPD no longer enforcing the low-level trafficking of controlled substances? And would you support a motion in council to that effect?
Yeah, there's a lot packed into that question. What I've been trying to do is to move us toward a safe supply in the city, and I've think we've had some success there. In fact, I did have a call with the federal health minister last week to talk about how we could make Safe Supply a more permanent tool in our toolbox, which I think is going to make is making a difference and will make a big difference, especially if we can get provincial regulatory changes at the same time. So I think that is the best answer at this point. However, I do think, as I've called for in this review, is for the province to review policing approaches to those people who use drugs. And so I do think, again, for changes in one municipality can be symbolic in some senses. It needs to happen in all municipalities. There has to be a uniform approach to policing that happens in all municipalities. So that's why Safe Supply, the measures that have been undertaken by the feds in the province are really great, because they apply to every municipality and everybody in the province rather than a small geographic subset. So for me, I'm always open to new ideas, and then look forward to working with the Premier and the provincial government if they agree to do this review to talk about all these issues.
Right, but how would we consider this version of Safe Supply a success when this month has had the highest level of overdose fatalities in the history of BC?
Yeah, for me, this is the biggest crisis we're facing, and it seems to be forgotten often, and that's why I, for example, had a press conference with Dr. Patty Daly 2 weeks ago specifically to highlight this. We're doing what we can here at the city with investing in what we can do for harm reduction, trying to push ahead the senior levels of government with some success, but we are bound by the laws that define what municipalities, provinces, and the federal government can do. So the best I can do is to work with these levels of government, and I think we've been having some very good success, and I'm hopeful that we'll have more movement on this from the federal and provincial governments in terms of the overdose crisis.
Right. If I could
And
just ask those.
Oh, sorry. The final question goes to Francis Bula, Globe and Mail. Go ahead.
For the noise in the background, they're tearing my neighborhood apart. Anyway, I want to know if you have talked to the Premier or anyone, the Solicitor General or anyone about what you've asked for here. Number one, yes or no, and if you have, what are you expecting from them?
We have sent an advance copy of the speech to the Premier's office, as well as the Solicitor General's office, to let them know what I was calling for today. I realize I have to say it first and send the official letter, which I will be doing, and then I would like to have a timely response if we could. I do think, though, that this is where the focus is on Vancouver, because it's the largest police service in the province. We do know groups from all across the province are concerned about this and have heard it a number of times. So the time is now to do a review, and I'm hopeful that that's what will happen.
Right, but you haven't heard back from them at all or had any sort of back channel conversations about, yeah, we're concerned about this too.
I haven't had any direct conversations with the Premier or Solicitor General about this specific issue, although my office has been in contact with both the Premier's office and the Solicitor General's office since yesterday. So that conversation has just started.
Thanks a lot, everybody. That concludes the press conference today.